Chapter 155. Moving ahead, Brian and the branch manager continued listening to Deputy Manager Leo's report, which seemed to contain more bad news than good. After he finished, silence filled the room for a moment. Brian finally spoke. "We've done what we could and can only do what we can. As for the city's evacuation, that isn't something that can happen in a day or two, so there's no point in overthinking it. I'll find someone capable of completely isolating the cracks. If the method is strong enough, evacuation may not be necessary, but that's for the city government to decide. In the meantime, investigate any clues regarding the demon's involvement in this. The fact that similar incidents occurred in other cities, though rarely as severe as ours, marks the first time in a long while that a top race has directly attacked our realm." Brian sighed. "I'm exhausted, we'll talk later." With that, he disappeared, leaving the two managers in silence. A few seconds later, Deputy Manager Leo couldn't hold back his thoughts. "Branch Manager, do you think we're heading into another race war? Has it ever ended?" "Ah, that's true. I understand what you mean, though," the branch manager continued. "This is one of the few times in a long while that a top race has openly, well though indirectly, attacked us. If war truly breaks out against a race of this level, it will be nothing like the battles we've fought before with weaker races." Deputy Manager Leo remained silent, absorbing the weight of his superior's words. The branch manager finally sighed. "In the grand scheme of things, only the strongest decide the fate of a realm." "True," Leo agreed. Back in his community, Michael summoned his undead back into the real world, reinforcing the forces he had left behind to continue clearing the area. He then freed the people sheltered inside the vine domes he had created for their protection. Afterward, he handed the potions he had brought to his neighbor, the one with the rude nephew, so they could be used to heal the injured and provide some relief from the pain. Though the man was a supernatural, Michael still took the time to explain how to use the health potions properly, detailing their potency and effects. Fortunately, no one had died. That meant Michael never had to find out whether he would have felt guilty for not acting sooner. After all, he should have done this before leaving the community again for the second time, right after resolving the issue in his apartment building and with that neighbor. Now, a semblance of peace and order filled the blood-soaked streets. With his sharp hearing, Michael occasionally picked up the sound of sobs from various people, regardless of age or gender, but since they weren't his family, he didn't care. With his mind at ease, he finally took the time to bathe and clean himself. By the time he was done, dawn had arrived and daylight had brightened the city outside. Changing into a set of clothes that felt noticeably tighter on him, Michael sat on the chair in his room and pulled up the notifications, the ones he had received after killing his first supernatural and the 4 humans. However, something about the notifications seemed strange. There were no stars. "You have killed a level 25 Aurora human mage. You have gained 2,855 EXP. You killed 5 levels higher than your own, earning a 6x experience multiplier. You have gained 17,130 EXP. You have killed a level 9 Aurora Human Knight Apprentice, times 4. You have gained EXP. There were no stars. Additionally, a title appeared beside the human's name, as if it was used to differentiate a race. Michael wasn't unfamiliar with the concept of races, but looking at the notification before him, it seemed that the humans here weren't just a singular group, but rather a distinct branch, categorized separately despite being human. He immediately had the urge to test Undead Revival on one of the corpses, but forced himself to stay calm. Why didn't humans have stars? What did that mean for his talent? What conditions needed to be met for a being to receive no stars? Did the absence of stars signify that humans in this realm had no potential limit, that as long as they had the opportunity, they could continue advancing indefinitely? Michael briefly considered whether this was the same for other races, but since he hadn't encountered one yet, the thought was short-lived. Things are getting interesting, haha. The word slipped out before he realized it, excitement bubbling to the surface as he got lost in thought. He quickly composed himself, dismissing the panels in front of him. Now he needed to decide what to do next. First and foremost, his family. Now that his mind was clearer, a chill ran down his spine. Had he not awakened, had he not taken leveling up and evolving his undead seriously, he could have lost his family. He could have lost his own life. He had been lucky to have enough strength, but this incident made him crave even more power. It also made him realize how vulnerable his family was. As much as he wanted to avoid the thought, his mind moved too fast to ignore the reality. There were things beyond his control. Something tragic could happen to his family, and no matter what, he wouldn't be able to blame himself. Yet deep down, he knew he still would. That was why he wanted to give his family power. The fastest way would be to use his talent on them, but that would require them to die first. Michael froze at the thought. How did that idea even cross my mind? Shaking his head, he considered other options. One thing was certain, he no longer wanted to live in Woodstone City. This incident was the perfect excuse to leave. Before he awakened, Michael had always wanted to see more of the world beyond what was shown on the internet. The hologram technology, the hover cars, the wonders of civilization. Woodstone City was too backward to showcase the true potential of this world. There had to be other cities with higher-level cracks and stronger supernatural branches. Some could provide him with more opportunities to gain experience points and other interesting corpses, while others could offer better security, even if their protection was meant for the general public rather than him or his family. At the very least, there had to be cities better than Woodstone. Then there was the possibility of making his family stronger. It might be difficult for Aunt Mia to step onto the supernatural path at her age, but Lily still had plenty of time. Even if she had terrible cultivation talent, just like Michael himself had before his awakening, with enough resources, she could be force-fed, drug-enhanced, and turned into a prodigy. Michael planned to make this a reality. There was no guarantee that anyone could awaken, or at least, no method Michael was currently aware of, but he firmly believed that with the right conditions, it was possible to forcefully push someone to the point of igniting a life seed. If the circumstances were ideal, it could work. As for the possibility that Aunt Mia might not be able to light a life seed even with ample resources, several thoughts ran through Michael's mind. For one, since he wanted her to live a long life, he would have to find methods to prolong it. The idea that such things didn't exist never even crossed his mind. If demigods, beings more powerful than that mysterious figure in blue who had cleared the city's crisis in an instant, existed, and if supernaturals themselves could already live for extended periods, then Michael had every reason to believe that there were even greater resources out there in the universe, resources that could extend the lifespan of ordinary humans. Of course, they would likely be incredibly difficult to acquire. Then there was another idea he personally liked, reserving a contract slot for his family and filling it with powerful undead that could change their size. For now, though, these were just ideas. He had other matters to take care of first. A moment later, Michael reached for his phone and reread the message the association had sent him just before he entered the bathroom. Thanks to his efforts in preserving the building, the water system was still intact. The crisis in the city has calmed down, but supernaturals are still encouraged to remain cautious and stay aware of their surroundings. If you notice anything unusual that needs reporting or encounter a situation you can't handle, please reach out to us. Additionally, for the next 3 days, the association will be purchasing the corpses of defeated monsters at 3 times the market price as compensation for your service. More rewards are still being considered. Thank you all for your support. May the will of Aurora prevail for 1,000,000 years. Michael's gaze lingered on the last sentence. May the will of Aurora prevail for 1,000,000 years. Even now, he felt a strange sensation whenever he read those words. But after seeing them repeatedly, he was beginning to think they weren't just a simple motto. May the will of Aurora prevail for 1,000,000 years. Will of Aurora. Was that the key part of the phrase? Michael wasn't sure, nor did he dwell on it too much. But after seeing it again, right after noticing how the system panel addressed the bodies in his storage space, it made him pause and think just a little deeper. Michael skimmed through the first few paragraphs of the message, already familiar with most of the content. However, one particular section made him smile. For a moment, he could almost see millions grinning at him. For the next 3 days, the association will be purchasing the corpses of defeated monsters at 3 times the market price as compensation for your service. Michael couldn't even count how many corpses he and his undead had killed, but it was definitely in the thousands, perhaps close to 2,000 or even slightly above. And the best part, some of those corpses came from monsters in higher-level cracks, meaning even greater profits. No, even if all the cracks had been low-level, tripling the standard price per corpse still made this an incredibly lucrative opportunity. Of course, stronger corpses from higher-level cracks would fetch even more, and Michael was more than happy with his haul. This method is actually quite good. It ensures the association directly compensates those who truly fought, rather than mistakenly rewarding some supernatural who just claims to have protected the public. Naturally, there were still plenty of loopholes that could be exploited depending on how the association handled things. But overall, Michael saw this as a decent way to address the issue of rewarding supernaturals. The fact that additional rewards might still be given later on made him feel slightly less resentful toward the Federation. Only slightly. However, in the end, if the benefits were good enough, even a terrible parent could be loved. Feeling refreshed, Michael exchanged a few words with his family before heading out of his apartment. His goal, to retrieve the corpses he had accumulated outside the community. Even mosquito meat is still meat, and I happen to like meat. With the help of 2 strong undead orcs, Michael got to work again, though the process ended up dirtying his fresh outfit once more. Hours passed, and most people had begun to accept and adapt to the situation. In fact, some, especially teenagers, were already back on their phones. However, they weren't scrolling through reels or watching entertainment. Everything they were doing was still related to the crisis. After reconnecting with the outside world, the residents of Woodstone City discovered that the situation was far more serious than they had initially thought. Their city hadn't been the only one that had gone through an apocalyptic event. Supernaturals within Woodstone City, along with its general populace, soon learned the shocking truth. 20 cities across Aurora had suffered the same catastrophe. One thought ran through the minds of most people. What was happening in the Federation? Unfortunately, no officials had come forward to address the situation. Instead, the world was left to rely on the words, thoughts, and speculations of various news channels, local networks being the most prominent, as well as commentary from celebrities. Michael only learned about this after accidentally eavesdropping on a conversation. The news shocked him, but he quickly calmed himself. At the end of the day, whether it was in the land of origin or the real world, he needed one thing: strength. To put it simply, strength was almost everything. No. Strength was everything. Absorbed in their tasks, a few hours unknowingly passed. Before Michael realized it, more people had already entered his community. Some were survivors from other areas, assessing the city's damage. Others were workers sent to wash the blood off buildings and streets. And then there were the supernaturals, freely using their powers in broad daylight under the watchful eyes of ordinary people. Well, Michael himself had used his powers more than once during this time. It suddenly felt like the hidden society the Federation had worked so hard to build for the supernatural world had collapsed in an instant. Now, the world was more aware of the supernatural than ever before. Michael frowned as a few cameras flashed past him. Some belonged to local news crews, while others were just regular people taking photos and videos with their phones. Regardless of their identity, their goal was the same, to share what they had captured. However, it wasn't Michael they were focused on. Their attention was on his undead. Michael, who had been unable to send them back to the netherworld before the camera harassment began, had no choice but to call them his summons whenever questioned. Fortunately, his two largest undead, Lucky and Prince, hadn't been seen by the public. Otherwise, he would have faced even more questions. For a brief moment, Michael felt he understood what celebrities went through. The worst part, he wasn't even in a crowd. Unfortunately, he still couldn't dismiss his undead. They still had work to do, helping him load his claimed corpses into the hover trucks belonging to the Supernatural Association. It was Michael's first time seeing one in person. With a staff member handling communication and negotiations, Michael, who wasn't interested in haggling, established a pleasant relationship with him. The man even used his connections to prioritize transporting Michael's loot ahead of others. Because of this, Michael missed the opportunity to return to the land of origin and fill his open contract slots before the daily evolution point refresh. In the end, he still gained 40 evolution points, bringing his total to 71. If he chose to accumulate and save his points, he could evolve one of his undead into a 1-star extraordinary rank creature. But that was something to consider later. For now, Michael happily sent off the association staff and checked his account balance. $15,354,526. He was rich again. Wait, that wasn't right. He still had $2 million before the transaction, so technically, he had already been rich. Michael felt conflicted. The moment he got his hands on something he really needed, he knew he'd be back to his broke days in no time. Shaking his head, he glanced around once more, conveniently ignoring the cameras pointed at him. Just as he was about to head back to his apartment, something caught his eye. Michael frowned. Some creeps were taking pictures of his clueless female orcs. Creeps. Under the astonished eyes of the public, Michael and his female orcs vanished into thin air. The latter because he had summoned them back to the netherworld, and the former because he had bolted straight for his apartment. Back at home, the scent of freshly cooked food filled the air. With his sharp hearing, Michael could pick up the whispers of his aunt and cousin. Thinking for a moment, a smile crept onto his face. No one knows what can happen, so. $15,354,526. Michael checked his account balance. To be honest, it should have been more, but the taxes had been insane. Very, very crazy. Michael conveniently ignored it, just like he had done for his previous big income. Apparently, taxes weren't a thing for any transaction under 10 million if related to the association, but once you went over that, it seemed like you also paid for unknown, owed corpses too. Soon, $14,354,526. With a mischievous smile, Michael wondered what his family's reaction would be when they found out what he had just done. However, he had barely stepped into his room when he heard a scream. Wait, no. Two screams. Michael. I need some money, Brother Michael. I'm too broke. Hadohata. Watching the two rush into his room, Michael burst out laughing. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Not perfect, but a happy and healthy family. In the end, after chasing down Aunt Mia, who once again thought he was sending too much, and Lily, who had somehow instantly recovered from her depression and started listing everything they needed, Michael found himself exhausted. He still didn't understand why he needed to buy a bag of all things, but after all the fuss, he decided to take a short break. That short break quickly turned into a deep sleep. By the time Michael woke up, it was already getting dark. The body is really amazing, Michael muttered in frustration. Despite his strength, he couldn't even control a little sleep, especially when he hadn't overexerted himself in the morning's battle. Whatever, I feel more refreshed now. As he stood up, he could sense his family and Undead's presence in the apartment, all moving around in the same area. Curious, he used share senses with his Undead to see what was happening. Immediately, Michael was taken aback. His Undead was cleaning. And not just cleaning, but doing it extremely well. Beginning's movements were trained, precise. A little unsettled, not because he disliked it, but because it was so unexpected, Michael canceled share senses. With how much time Beginning has spent in the real world doing various tasks, it's probably one of my smartest Undead now, right? It seemed possible, but after a moment Michael shook the thought away. Since he himself felt the need to refresh, he decided to do just that. As the water ran in the bathroom, several thoughts about what he was about to do next in the next few hours crossed his mind. But first, he wanted to talk to his family about moving out. He didn't think they'd refuse. Next. You want us to move? Aunt Mia repeated what Michael had just told her. She was about to instinctively refuse, questions like why, forming in her mind when she suddenly paused. Though she hadn't left the house, preferring to stay indoors, which seemed to satisfy Michael, she had still seen what lay outside. The view from their apartment windows, the news, and the internet all painted the same picture: chaos. In a way, this place no longer seemed livable. How would the supermarket function when it wasn't even in proper shape? How was Lily supposed to go to school? Though the holidays were approaching, from what Aunt Mia had seen, the city's restoration, if it even happened, would take months if not longer. And even then, it was unlikely to return to how it was just yesterday. Thinking about it this way, moving out actually made sense. Michael watched his aunt deep in thought, but didn't interrupt. If she had immediately spoken against his idea, it would have led to a debate. But her silence meant she was seriously considering it. Michael knew this much about her after years of living together. Of course, just because she was thinking it over didn't mean she had agreed, but that didn't change anything for him. If she objected, he was ready to switch into debate mode. To give his family a better life and ensure their safety, Michael didn't mind spending time, even half the night, convincing her. And he knew Aunt Mia well enough to expect that if she disagreed, she would argue her point logically, not just reject the idea outright. Fortunately, it didn't come to that. Her next words brought a smile to Michael's face. Maybe moving out really isn't a bad idea, she admitted before adding, but where would we even move to? Michael had an answer. There was no specific answer. I don't know yet. Aunt Mia gasped slightly at his response, but before she could comment, Michael spoke first. But I'll find one, don't worry, Aunt Mia. What I have in mind is a place that can provide better security for you guys and more. By the time Michael finished speaking, a determined expression had taken over his face, and his aura grew serious. Aunt Mia's words caught in her throat. A moment later, she sighed. It was just as she thought. Her boy was growing up. Though he didn't say much, a part of her feared that maybe she and her daughter were holding him back. A part of her wanted to tell him that he didn't have to worry so much about them and should focus on himself, but she couldn't. She knew that as they grew, both Michael and even her own daughter would eventually go their separate ways, but she didn't want to be the one to push him away. She still wanted their presence. So for now, she said nothing. In any case, I trust you. She trusted Michael. He had always been an intelligent and reliable boy. Michael's serious expression softened slightly at Aunt Mia's words. He didn't show it outwardly, but inside he felt really good. Ignoring his cousin, who was hiding behind her bedroom door eavesdropping, Michael stood up from the sofa opposite Aunt Mia and spoke. I'll get it done, Ma. Just give me a little time. But in the meantime, we should start preparing. Also, for the next few days, use her for the house. As he spoke, Michael stretched out his hand. A greenish-black summoning circle appeared in the center of the room, and a figure emerged from it. Aunt Mia let out a startled cry at the sudden appearance, but managed to calm herself quickly. Click squeak. The sound of a door opening followed. Lily burst out of her room, only to freeze in shock at the big sister now standing in the room. Aunt Mia shot an angry glare at Michael, who scratched his cheek in mild embarrassment. Though he had done something similar before, summoning that big guy to help clean the house, back then, everything was happening too quickly. The chaos from the cracks had numbed their ability to react properly. Now that things were calmer, her reaction was only natural. However, the sudden appearance of the undead wasn't the only thing that surprised Aunt Mia. She's quite pretty, can she speak? Aunt Mia asked hesitantly. According to her nephew, these strange beings were all his summons and were extremely strong. But this was the first time she had seen one that wasn't intimidating, if she ignored the height. Not yet, Michael replied in an odd tone. To be honest, he wasn't sure if his undead would ever be able to speak. But who knew what was possible in this world? He didn't deny the possibility. In fact, he even hoped that such a reality would one day manifest. Okay, go and rest, I'll use her. Aunt Mia felt a little odd saying this, as the being in front of her felt almost human, aside from the white eyes and gray skin. Michael nodded. He figured that since keeping his undead active seemed to gradually increase their intelligence, there was no harm in letting his aunt make better use of them when they were idle. In fact, all of his summonable undead were currently outside, still guarding the apartment building and the community. Seeing that everything was fine, Michael turned to head into his room, only for his cousin to call out to him just as he was about to enter. As for Lily, Michael's respect for her had only grown. Despite everything, she was still able to stay active. Even after learning the truth about her friend on the upstairs floor, when the officers came to arrest the animal responsible, she still tried her best not to sink into sadness. Michael didn't know what he could do for her, but he was glad she was holding on. What do you want? Michael asked, turning to look at his cousin. That big guy has a name, right? Beginning, I believe. Yes. What's her name? Lily asked, gesturing toward the female orc in the sitting room. Michael paused for a moment before a wide smile appeared on his face. Lily, her name is Lily. Thinking about what happened a few seconds ago made Michael smile again. Finally, his bad joke actually became a good one for him. Aunt Mia's twitching eyelids at the revelation only made it better. After having fun, Michael calmed himself down and turned to the best issue at hand. The land of origin. Before the event with the demonic cultivators, Michael, who had just discovered civilization, wanted to head there after performing several rounds of undead summoning on his undead. From then, he would decide whether or not to evolve the ones the skill had successfully affected. Commander Necromancer, Specialist Necromancer, and Horde Necromancer. Michael identified himself as the last one since the more undead he had, the more beneficial it was for him, literally. But he also knew that due to his talent, he could be whatever necromancer type he wanted. Commander Necromancers focused on commanding a smaller group of high-tier undead, valuing the strength and potential of each individual. This path prioritized quality over quantity. Their weakness was their limited numbers, and their strength was their high-quality undead. Though they would eventually have more summons as they leveled up, in a power-matched event, they would only have a few undead to use. However, this was of little concern to Michael. With his talent, he did not need to focus on specific undead for certain situations. All his undead could potentially be excellent at all times. This meant that Michael could not only be a Commander Necromancer, but he could also be a Horde Necromancer at the same time, creating a rare hybrid. It could even extend to Specialist Necromancers, who focused on specific types of undead, such as mages, tanks, or assassins, to create powerful synergies within their forces. With his talent, Michael could do it all, as long as he had enough evolution points. That was the main requirement, and unfortunately, it wasn't easy to fulfill. I'll still check out that place I saw in the land of origin after I'm done with everything. It should still be nighttime, so it's only better. After making his decision, Michael had one last thing to do. Undead summoning. Following the appearance of a magic circle, a towering orc shaman emerged from it. It was the female orc that could manipulate water. Perhaps it was because of the recent chaos, but Michael did not feel too safe leaving his body, exposed in the real world when his consciousness was in the land of origin. Even Lily, whom he had summoned, had been given a command to obey his aunt, and to protect the apartment and the people in it alongside beginning. The female orc in front of Michael now was his personal protection for his real-life body, while his consciousness was in the land of origin. Hopefully, her protection wouldn't be needed in the end. Relaxed and calm, Michael laid on his bed and connected his consciousness with his body in the land of origin. A moment later in the dark night, a pair of green eyes opened. "I'm back," Michael muttered as he stretched his body. The fresh air of the forest rushed past his face immediately. Once again, Michael felt that limitless sensation of extreme freedom he always seemed to have in the land of origin. With his senses spread out, he felt the presence of his other undead and walked out of the cave, where he was met with corpses. They belonged to the ones he had killed from the cracks, which he planned to revive soon. There were some pretty interesting ones Michael was very optimistic about, and he looked forward to adding them to his Undead Army. But for now, he had something else in mind to focus on, even if there was a griffin corpse not too far away. Before doing anything else, Michael released Lucky and Prince from the netherworld and had them stay around his cave dwelling. Then he used Share Senses on multiple undead to get a better understanding of his surroundings. Fortunately, nothing had changed much, aside from the smell coming off the corpses, which was still unable to mask the fresh, earthy scent of the forest, oddly blending at times. Of course, it could also mean that Michael's body, having stayed close to these corpses, whether there was a consciousness controlling it or not, had simply gotten used to the smell as it was a living thing itself. After confirming that his surroundings were more or less the same as before he left and were safe, Michael excitedly brought something out from his storage space and placed it in front of him. It was yet another corpse, but different from the ones around him. It was the corpse of a human, one of his first. Michael was excited for so many reasons. At first, it had just been an extreme curiosity about what a human undead would look like and how it would evolve. Then it became about what its evolution could be, seeing as it didn't have star ratings. Eventually, it turned into an experiment, one that could determine what he himself or any other person would be like if, by some chance, he could evolve such thing in the future. Talents worked in different ways. Some could be used beyond their common features, and some even evolved or advanced to say. It had only been a few days, and Michael barely knew anything about his talent. All he knew was that as long as something was connected to his soul, he could use it. So was there a reason his body, being the container of his soul, wasn't part of the things he could evolve? And could his talent itself grow stronger than it already was? Michael didn't know the answer to any of these questions. For the latter, he figured it might be best to simply accumulate evolution points and see if a change would happen. However, all of that was for the future him to handle and figure out. For the current Michael, there was only one thing on his mind. Human Knight Apprentice. A human knight apprentice from the Aurora realm. It had no visible race rank or star rating. The description that appeared when Michael used detect on a corpse for the first time was also quite interesting. Aurora realm. I wonder what the other realms look like. Is there an elven realm, a dragon realm filled with dragons? Heavens, I wonder how they look like. And Michael stopped himself from saying it aloud. But deep inside, he couldn't help but wonder, what would the evolution forms of races he hadn't even seen yet look like? The thought was a little dark, since, due to his subconscious reasoning that only dead creatures could be evolved, he had imagined these races he hadn't even seen yet as corpses. Michael shook the thought out of his head and immediately used Undead Revival on the corpse in front of him. As a rank 1 Necromancer, far stronger than the corpse could ever be, it only took a single try to turn it into an undead. Fortunately, it worked on the first attempt. Nothing was ever guaranteed, of course, but his rank gave him a high success rate. This was also why Michael hadn't tried reviving the level 25 human mage corpse he had. Due to its strength, the chance of failure was much higher. Still, he was glad he had been able to find 4 more human corpses. It increased his chances of having at least one human undead. After the revival, Michael commanded the undead to stand up and examined its appearance. The rough-looking man now appeared much paler, his once lively eyes now completely white, but overall he still looked very human. It made sense. He was originally a human, unlike Beginning and Lily, who were orcs evolved from goblins. After a quick glance at the undead human before him, Michael turned his focus to his main goal. However, the moment he checked his talent section to evolve the undead, he was stunned by what he saw. I can't evolve it. Michael frowned. He had expected something unusual to happen, considering there were no star ratings or other indicators, but he had assumed it would just cost more evolution points. Yet instead, he was met with insufficient evolution points. 71 evolution points aren't enough to evolve it. Then how many do I need? Michael didn't believe it was simply because humans were an inherently formidable race. At least, he had never thought of himself as formidable before awakening, and the undead in front of him didn't seem any stronger than he had been back then. Still, he wasn't one to jump to conclusions. Michael proceeded to revive the other 3 human corpses, only to end up in the same situation. Unless he wanted to assume that all 4 just happened to be special cases, it had to be because of their race. But even then, he didn't believe this was because humans were uniquely powerful. There had to be another explanation, something similar to how evolving through stars and ranks required 5 times the previous amount of evolution points. In the end, there was nothing he could do for now. Michael decided to wait and accumulate more evolution points to see if anything changed. Yes, he was willing to be patient, at least until he had enough to evolve an extraordinary creature. If he still couldn't evolve his human undead then, he would just evolve Prince instead, pushing the beast not only to its peak but beyond it, into a higher rank altogether. 2 days at most, and I'll have my answer. At level 20 from level 15, Michael had gained 10 open slots for contracts. Now having used 4, he only had 6 left. One was reserved for the Griffin, and another for the undead human mage. The remaining 4 would be divided among other undead materials he had in mind. For one, he wanted to reserve a spot for the sand scorpion and a long-armed monkey. That left only 2 more open slots, which he could use however he liked. Since he already had specific targets in mind, Michael immediately began attempting to contract them with the limited corpses he had at hand. Of course, he didn't start with the difficult ones, the Griffin and the human mage, due to their strength and the limited number of corpses, especially in the latter's case. If worse came to worst, he could try buying a few monster corpses from the association, but he wasn't sure if human corpses were something they even sold. Perhaps if they knew his class, they might consider it. Maybe they'd even be willing to sell one after some deliberation. But that was all speculation. If it were up to him, Michael didn't want to go to the association out of desperation. If he ever sought out the association for a corpse, it would be because he was simply trying his luck, not because he was forced to. He also didn't want to risk losing the almost rank 2 corpse he had. Michael had a strong suspicion that if he managed to turn that corpse into an undead, it would stay with him for a very, very long time. With these thoughts running through his head, Michael turned his focus back to the corpses in front of him. Under the illumination of the bright full moon, shrouded by the dark of the night, he began his attempt at contracting a long-armed monkey and a sand scorpion. In the real world, Deputy Manager Leo and the branch manager sat with their hands on their heads, rubbing their foreheads as if trying to suppress a terrible headache. So you're saying all the previous cracks in the entire city have disappeared? The branch manager asked again, his tone heavy with disbelief. Yes, Leo confirmed. The news came about 10 minutes ago. That's why I'm here now. The branch manager exhaled sharply. I suppose this should be expected. You rarely find different cracks side by side. There's no infinite spot for negative energy after all. Even after appearing, negative energy isn't needed anymore. They just help speed up the regeneration process. He leaned back, his fingers tapping the desk. We have 3 level 5 cracks above this city now. If anything, he muttered, now that I think about it, it would actually be surprising if nothing happened to the previous cracks. Though he understood the reasoning, it didn't make him feel any better. These cracks, they were the livelihood of the Supers Association branches in the city. Their workers, their funding, and the trade of the materials extracted from the cracks, they all depended on them. And now they were all gone. Damn those bastards, Deputy Manager Leo muttered, his ever-composed demeanor cracking as he let out a rare curse. There were many who suffered in the recent chaos, but there were also those who benefited, the awakeners. If any group grew stronger the fastest due to the chaos, it was them. However, a significant number also fell during the chaos due to their lack of initial strength. After all, not every awakener was as power and money hungry as Michael, Myra, and Lillian, that started hunting monsters early on. These 3, however, had grown considerably stronger thanks to the chaos. There was no need to mention Michael. His growth was relentless, increasing by the moment. As for Myra and Lillian, both had managed to advance to rank 1 during the chaos. However, their quest completion results were far less impressive than Michael's. They had done the bare minimum to advance, which meant they reaped fewer benefits. Even so, reaching rank 1 made them significantly stronger compared to when they were still unranked. Thanks to the cracks, they had also leveled up a few times, though they were still far from reaching Michael's current height of level 20. Both were still level 15, his previous level. He has new undead. Myra's voice broke the silence as she stood behind Lillian, who was calmly watching the local news on her phone. On the screen, a familiar face appeared, Michael. He looked slightly dirty, but completely unharmed. The news had spent minutes interviewing the survivors Michael had protected, before turning to question Michael himself and his unique summons. Watching how Michael barely responded made Myra sneer. He truly isn't one to talk, huh? She hadn't forgotten. That man had completely ignored her message, and was still ignoring it now. She had sent him another message after the chaos settled, yet he hadn't replied. Annoyed, she debated whether she should just block his number. Yet, despite her frustration, she found herself feeling relieved that he was okay. I saw his undead carrying a griffin onto one of those hover trucks from the association. Lillian's sudden words made Myra turn to her. Do you think he's the one who killed it? Though she already knew the likely answer, she still asked. Most likely, Lillian replied without hesitation. It shouldn't have been anyone else, and those griffins even move in groups. He was the only one defending his community. A brief silence followed. From everything they had seen, it was obvious Michael was strong. Extremely strong. And only getting stronger. Last time, he could easily handle rank 1 monsters. Now, he was dealing with rank 2 monsters. His growth was evident. And frighteningly fast. Both girls assumed his strength and rapid progression were due to an opportunity he received in the land of origin. But regardless of whether that was true or not, one thing remained clear. Their classmate was becoming terrifyingly powerful. Even Myra, who had once been confident in her own special class and talent, now found herself doubting. How can I get the recipe for a bigger bomb? Contracting the long-armed monkey and sand scorpions went smoothly for Michael. Since he was already familiar with their skills after fighting them, he wasn't particularly excited about contracting them, though he was still satisfied with the result. When it came time to evolve them, however, that was when he expected to feel truly excited. The good news was that, thanks to their high levels, once they evolved into 1-star rare rank, they would likely approach max level, and after reaching 3-star rare rank, they should surely enter rank 2. With that done, Michael turned his eyes toward the 2 biggest prizes in the room. The Griffin and the Human Mage. Between the 2, Michael ultimately chose to start with the Human Mage. Though powerful, the Mage was still, at the end of the day, a rank 1 creature. From what he had seen of Brian's ability to fly, and the fact that level 4 creatures seemed to be rank 2, Michael began to notice a pattern. Level 4 appeared to be a turning point in the cultivation system. A level 25 cultivator was probably just a peak rank 1 being, and stepping into the master rank likely made them a true rank 2 being in the eyes of an awakener. Michael also recalled Brian's words about rank 2 awakeners gaining the ability to fly. However, he had sensed uncertainty in Brian's tone, so he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, the possibility excited him. Regardless of whether it was true or not, Michael felt that rank 2 must be an important milestone for awakeners as well. Perhaps at higher ranks, the power difference and unique abilities granted by each rank became even more pronounced. There had to be a reason why Awakener academies only accepted rank 2 students. It could only mean there was something special about that rank. But whatever it was, that level was still far from him. Setting aside those thoughts, Michael focused on the task at hand. He was about to attempt undead revival on the dead human mage. His mana reserves were still high, so he didn't increase it outright. In any case, he had more mana than the human mage had when alive. With that in mind, Michael immediately got to work. After taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he began. Undead Revival. Immediately, Michael felt a massive surge of mana being drawn from his mana pool, far more than he had ever experienced with any of the monsters he had revived before. Well, it made sense. This human mage was the strongest undead material he had ever attempted to revive. Unfortunately, and somewhat expectedly, Michael failed. His heart pounded rapidly at the realization that he only had one of this corpse. But after a brief moment of panic, he managed to calm himself down again. Undead Revival. Michael didn't know why fate loved to play tricks on him, but he succeeded. Barely on the last attempt, and it wasn't even because of mana. He almost lost to chance. However, since he had succeeded in the end, Michael was quite happy. Aurora Human Disciple Rank Mage LV, 25 Max. Named None. Exp. 563,345 102 1752. Skills: Earth Dome Intermediate Mastery, Fire Spear Intermediate Mastery, Fire Jet Intermediate Mastery, Earth Wall Intermediate Mastery, Earth Spike Intermediate Mastery, Fireball Intermediate Mastery. Master Michael Norman. Michael was momentarily blinded by the panel. The first thing he noticed was the sheer range of skills the human mage possessed. Though none had reached advanced mastery, there was a wide array of intermediate and basic mastery spells. Should I say, as expected of a commander rank mage. It was an undeniable fact. The spell models used in the Aurora cultivation system were likely more advanced than the skills most awakeners, at least the new ones, wielded. After all, an awakener didn't need to study magic to grow stronger. Their skills naturally progressed alongside their mana, evolving in quality over time. But this was a brute force method. Magic circles. They were the formulas that structured spells, the foundation of true magic. And those formulas, they had advanced versions. A rank 1 mage in Aurora's system could use rank 1 fireball spell, and so could a rank 2 mage. But even with precise manual control, there were still limitations. However, with greater knowledge, one could modify the spell model, the magic circle, to cast the same fireball spell but in a far more powerful form. Awakeners could do this too. In truth, the skills Michael had were all basic versions. If he could learn how to modify them, his system panel would automatically update them, allowing him to cast both the old and new versions at will. It was like upgrading a framework. The more knowledge he accumulated, and the stronger he became, the more he began to understand the fundamental differences between awakeners and cultivators. Cultivators were incredibly powerful, and in some ways, they felt like supernaturals operating under heavier restrictions, as if their lives were set on hard mode compared to awakeners. Ironically, that very limitation was also their greatest strength. But one thing puzzled Michael. Disciple rank. He felt as though he had stumbled upon a hidden truth about his own world. To be honest, there were many things that confused him about the cultivation system of the real world and the awakening system, but he had always assumed the answer was simple. Aurora's supernaturals had customized their power system. After the recent chaos, Michael was even more convinced. In fact, the cultivation system of Aurora and the Awakener system were strikingly similar, except the former had more divisions. Why did level 4 cracks start spawning rank 2 monsters? Why were master rank cultivators considered rank 2? The common factor was clear. Both had significant power upgrades and uniqueness once they reached level 4. Levels 1 to 3 seemed to correspond to rank 1 in the Awakener system, while everything beyond level 4 better aligned with the higher ranks of Awakeners. Did this mean that rank 1 to rank 3 cultivators weren't actually weak, but only seemed so because they had been divided into separate tiers when they were supposed to be grouped together as a single realm? And did this also mean that level 1 to 3 cracks were merely rank 1 cracks that had been further divided to match the cultivation system? Instead of calling them separate cracks, wouldn't it make more sense to label them as low, mid, and high rank 1 cracks? Michael felt like he was onto something, but regardless, he wasn't in the land of origin to ponder history. It seems that while there's no race rank, this undead still follows the rank system, though with fewer restrictions. He narrowed his eyes. Does this mean it can be leveled up infinitely? Michael's eyes widened in shock at the thought, but he quickly forced himself to calm down. Is this what it means to have no race rank, or is this what it truly means to be a race? The human corpses he had obtained today had opened up an entirely new avenue of thought for him. Michael turned to look at the undead mage. Its tattered robes were dirty and damaged, its pale skin marred with battle scars. Yet despite everything, not even the prince's last beating, nothing had managed to cripple it. As Michael stared at the corpse, which looked eerily similar to a living human if you took away its white eyes, a sudden thought struck him. Who am I? Michael asked the undead, his heart pounding in his chest. This was different. Unlike monsters, the mage had once been an intelligent being before it died. Would it remember anything? Could it still speak? Though its body was dead, the energy responsible for its reanimation also sustained it. Michael's heartbeat quickened. Then suddenly, through their connection, he felt a wave of confusion from the undead. The corpse tilted its head, and as Michael felt its gaze settle on him, a chill ran down his spine. That's a lot of movement for a question, Michael muttered, his tone serious. In this situation, it translated to the uniqueness of his new undead. Then, under Michael's widened eyes, "M-Master, why you are my M-Master? Yes, you are my master." The voice was dry and raspy, but unmistakably real. Michael's body trembled slightly. Just moments ago, in the real world, he had wished for an undead that could communicate. He just never expected to get one this soon. Michael didn't know how to react at first, but just as he was starting to wrap his head around the situation, a sudden thought entered his mind. He immediately turned to look at the 4 human undead not far from him. These 4 had been the ones who committed terrible acts against a couple before hiding in their house to avoid being caught by the association, only to end up in Michael's hands. They were humans just like this one. The only difference is that they're much weaker, so. Michael looked thoughtfully at the 4 human undead. After a quick consideration, he sent them the same mental message as before. Who am I? A second passed. Then another. Soon several reactions appeared. Michael felt waves of confusion through their connection, before each undead finally responded. M-Master. M-My L-Lord. Ma's Master. D-Daddy. Michael's smile grew wider with each response, until the last one. His face darkened. Who's your daddy? Michael barked at the certain undead. What he hadn't expected, however, was an actual response. You daddy. Michael's expression darkened even further. He wanted to say more, but he forced himself to calm down. Once he did, he reflected on what had just happened. They all seem to have independent thought, but their knowledge is shattered, he noted. From the way they spoke, haltingly at first, then more fluidly later, it was clear that their memories were fragmented. The fact that they each addressed him differently further supported this. Still, under the influence of their shared connection, they all recognized him as their master, regardless of the title they chose. Unfortunately, I can't evolve any of you, Michael muttered regretfully. He checked again, but none of the 5 human undead had any evolution options available. At least, not right now. Michael studied the 5 carefully. He usually didn't name his undead unless they could enter the netherworld, but looking at how normal these human undead appeared, several ideas surfaced in his mind. If they had something to cover their eyes, like glasses, they could walk in public during broad daylight. Their human size also made them easy to transport between realms. If a purpose arises, these 5 could be useful both in the land of origin and in real life, Michael thought. Compared to his other undead, who either had odd appearances or were still developing their intelligence, these ones seemed more adaptable and picked up information quickly. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Michael set the human undead aside and turned toward his next objective. A griffin. After so long, though ironically, he hadn't even been a supernatural for a full week, it was finally time to have a flying undead. With what he had in hand, Michael hoped he'd be lucky with Undead Revival this time. But first, after quite some time, it was finally time to check his progress. Status: Name: Michael Norman. Class: Adept Necromancer. Level 20. Exp: 76,718, 134551. Strength: 31.92. Agility: 43.66. Constitution: 33.22. Intelligence: 115. Attribute points: 60. Skills: Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses, Spearmanship, Acid Shot, Bone Spear, Slow Curse, Bone Armor, Corpse Explosion. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Class Skill: Contract Slot 4750. Gift: Mark of Origin. Michael's stats hadn't improved by much. As he grew stronger and his stats increased, the boosts from his class and race felt smaller in comparison. Of course, even a single point now could be equivalent to 10 points when he had first awakened, so they weren't useless. If anything, his growth was now more steady rather than explosive. This was why, at a certain point, when leveling up became harder, attribute points became one of the most precious resources for an awakener. Even most of the most balanced stat build enthusiasts eventually had to abandon that path if they wanted true strength. In the end, stats became a serious issue for all awakeners. This was also why dying in the land of origin was painful, even though it wasn't a real death. Even someone like Michael, who was still among the weaker awakeners with lesser stats than the strongest, dying and losing 10% of his stats permanently would be a devastating blow. Since the body in the land of origin synced with the real-world body, dying meant losing strength in both. However, all of this was only beginning to be relevant to Michael. For now, when he looked at his stats, he was simply satisfied. At level 20, Michael had 50 contract slots, and after contracting all the human corpses, an impulsive decision that ironically turned out well, he had only 3 slots left. Now, Michael wanted to use one of those slots to contract a black griffin. But considering it was a rank 2 creature, likely far stronger than him in raw stats, this wouldn't be easy. The mana required to attempt even a single contract was a major concern. This was why he called up his status panel. It was finally time to use his attribute points. Michael glanced at his most important stat as a mage. Intelligence, 115. Attribute points, 60. I only need 5 points to reach 120 intelligence, which gives me a chance to gain a skill. For every 20-point increase in a major stat depending on the class, there was a chance to gain a new skill. However, even though the probability was as high as 50%, it didn't guarantee a skill every 40-point increase. Take Michael, for example. Most of his skills came as rewards from his advancement quests, or were ones he actively learned. The number of skills he had gained purely from increasing intelligence was surprisingly low. Unfortunately, he was even more unlucky when it came to the rare chance of gaining a skill from other stats that weren't a major focus for his class. Since intelligence would get the largest share of his points anyway, spending 5 right away didn't seem like a bad idea. Without hesitation, he made the adjustment. Intelligence, 120. Attribute points, 55. As always, Michael waited for a while to see if a new notification would appear. He wasn't very optimistic, but the next moment, when another panel appeared in his view, a happy smile formed on his face. Your mana is overflowing. You have gained the skill Blind Curse. Another curse skill. Michael was surprised. More than surprised, he was happy. Finally, it seemed like Lady Luck had decided to smile on him. Without hesitation, he checked the skill's description. Based on his understanding of his other curse-type skill, if this one was anything like that Ame, he already had a good idea of what it could do. Blind Curse, Basic Mastery Proficiency, 0.5%. Blind Curse reduces the target's vision, impairing their ability to perceive their surroundings. Duration 8 seconds. It's just as I thought, Michael muttered, a slight smile forming at the edge of his lips. Against an opponent of similar power, this skill, like the slow version of its series, had its limitations. However, even the little it could do was enough in a high-stakes battle. Michael hadn't tested it yet, but he believed that if he used both of his curse skills simultaneously on a single enemy, their combined effects might result in a qualitative change. Even if that change lasted only for a moment, at his current level, a single second could decide the outcome of a fight. I wonder if I'll get more curse skills in the future, he thought hopefully before shifting his focus back to his stats. After increasing his intelligence, he immediately felt the change. His mana pool expanded, increasing his overall mana capacity, though there was no improvement in quality. Looking at the 55 attribute points he still had left, Michael considered his next distribution carefully. For a mage, the importance of agility was closely linked to intelligence. Not only was it his second highest stat, but he also enjoyed the speed, reaction time, and flexibility it granted, especially since it made wielding his spear easier and more effective. With that in mind, he allocated 5 points to agility, bringing it up to 47. To avoid losing control over his body from previous experiences, he didn't add all 5 at once. Instead, he did it gradually, adjusting to the increasing changes. The method wasn't perfect, but it had its merits. After moving his limbs for a short while, he quickly regained full control over his body. With 10 attribute points spent, he now had 50 remaining. Michael didn't hesitate and added more into intelligence. The previous 5 points were too little to significantly boost his mana pool enough to revive a rank 2 creature. Although he didn't know exactly how much mana he needed, he was certain it would be a lot. The possibility of failure and having to restart the revival process also meant he needed enough mana to attempt it at least twice in a row. Right now he wasn't quite confident he could do all 3 tries on a corpse. With this thought in mind, Michael went all out, adding 30 points to his intelligence stat. Like before, he did it gradually, this time in larger increments, starting with 5 points, then 4, then 6, and so on. A little while later, he was done. His intelligence stat now stood at 150, an amount nearly 150 times that of an average human, at least in raw numbers. But more importantly, the quality of his intelligence was much higher than any normal person's. It wasn't just a quantitative increase, but a qualitative one. Feeling the abundance of mana surging through his body, Michael couldn't help but smile. The feeling of getting stronger was intoxicating. He turned his gaze toward the last 20 attribute points he had left. After a brief moment of consideration, he decided to keep them. He could have gone all out and added 10 more points to push his intelligence to 160, but he didn't. His current mana felt enough. Michael also didn't want to admit that part of the reason was his reluctance to face another failed chance at gaining a skill. Just when he thought Lady Luck was finally smiling at him, after hitting 140 intelligence and waiting second after second for another notification, he realized he had been too hopeful. Lady Luck wasn't smiling at him today. She had only pitied him for a brief moment before forgetting about him entirely. This should be enough to try Undead Revival 3 times in a row, right? Michael wasn't entirely confident about reviving one of the 3 black griffin corpses in front of him, and rightfully so. However, having 3 corpses meant 3 chances to finally gain a flying undead. He just hoped he wasn't too unlucky. His heart pounded with anxiety. Taking a moment to calm himself, lest his emotions affect the revival process, Michael steadied his breath. After finally settling down, he locked eyes on the massive black griffin corpse in front of him. Without hesitation, he activated Undead Revival. The moment he did, an alarming amount of mana surged out of his body. So much. Michael was shocked at how quickly his mana was being drained. The rate at which his mana was being consumed by the skill was something the revival process of the commander rank human mage he revived a while ago couldn't even compare to. Though he had been alarmed back then, it wasn't as significant as it was now. However, fortunately, he had more mana now. Judging by how things were going, it seemed like he could even attempt more than 1 corpse and still have enough left to make a few tries on another griffin corpse, even if he failed. Of course, Michael wasn't hoping to fail, but as expected, not everything always went as one wished. Rank 2 creatures are truly something, Michael muttered bitterly as he stared at the lifeless black griffin corpse in front of him. As expected, he had failed his first attempt. No surprise there, ironically. However, this was only the first. And with more mana still left in his mana pool, Michael immediately went for his second attempt. As he activated the skill, a thought crossed his mind. What if his 2 undead-related skills had advanced spell models? Aside from rituals that boosted success rates, this method also didn't seem too bad. Michael concentrated on what he was doing. As more mana drained from him, and it seemed like he was about to lose another attempt at successfully reviving this rank 2 flying unit. It succeeded. Yes. Michael couldn't help but clench his fists in excitement as he saw his contracted slot number increase from 47 to 48. Checking his panel wasn't even necessary. Due to the new connection he could now feel with the black griffin that stood before him, shaking its body, Michael didn't need a system notification to tell him he had succeeded. It was right in front of his eyes. Still buzzing with excitement, Michael then went to check out the status of his new undead. Black Griffin LV, 27. Rank Rare. Named None. Exp, 799,340, 5344814. Skills: Wind Manipulation Intermediate Mastery, Wind/Intermediate Mastery, Air Spike Intermediate Mastery, Air Bullet Intermediate Mastery. Master Michael Norman. Though he hadn't had access to the status of the Griffin before it became his undead, Michael, who had already fought with more than one of them more than once in the real world, felt the status was familiar. The Black Griffin, though it had a less impressive skill set than his level 25 human mage, was undoubtedly stronger. All its skills, too, were at intermediate mastery. Unlike his female orc shamans that also had an elemental manipulation skill, the Black Griffin actually complemented its main skill with elemental skills. rather than just throwing the element around. After calming down, Michael's eyes shined as he stared at the flying undead. A question he had surprisingly not thought about before popped up on his mind. It being dead, does that take away its flying ability, right? To be honest, Michael felt this wasn't likely, but he couldn't help but think about it. Fly, he immediately commanded the black griffin mentally. Though they were in a forest, it wasn't one dense with trees and had quite a few open areas around that could even comfortably accommodate the huge bodies of the griffin like the one in front of him. The moment Michael gave his command, the undead in front of him did not hesitate. It crouched down and added strength to its 4 limbs. After doing so, it gave itself a powerful jump and threw itself out of the coverage of the surrounding trees. Under Michael's intense gaze, he watched as the undead griffin spread out its wings and flapped them, creating a gust of wind and shot up to the sky. It twirled around in the sky for a moment before coming to fly above Michael's location. It was in the air. It flew. It didn't fall. Michael's calm heart once again started beating fast. Just a few days ago, he had fantasized about having a flying undead, and to think he got one so soon. Haha, a sudden thought appeared in Michael's mind. This undead. The black griffin flying above him. He wanted to ride it undead. For most people, the immediate response to such a term was evil. Darkness. Unclean. Michael had been no different before he became a necromancer. A part of him had once thought he'd be stuck with rotting, foul-smelling corpses and brittle skeletons. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. His undead weren't decaying husks that looked like they'd fall apart at any moment. To be honest, all of them exuded a certain kind of strange beauty. Like the black griffin soaring through the sky now. Under the moonlight, it looked exceptionally picturesque. I must have been too close to nothing but corpses these past few days to think like this, Michael muttered. And it wasn't like he was wrong. If there was one thing he had been far too familiar with this past week, it was dead bodies. Hundreds upon hundreds. Until they reached thousands. If his pre-awakening mindset had remained the same despite everything he had witnessed in such a short amount of time, that would have been the real surprise. Since he had already decided to ride the undead griffin, Michael wasted no time. Adding strength to his legs, he launched himself forward. His first step took him onto a tree branch. Using it as a foothold, he propelled himself again, soaring toward the highest branch of another tree. And with one final push, Michael burst out of the dense forest canopy and into the night sky, where he landed gracefully on the griffin's back. The body of the undead griffin was massive. Even with his tall frame, Michael felt small on its back. Since this was his first time riding a flying creature, it took him a few seconds to adapt to the up and down movement of the griffin's flight. However, once he did, Michael no longer hesitated. He gripped the griffin's neck area tightly with both hands and gave it a mental command. Fly up. The moment the griffin received the command, it reacted instantly. It dashed straight into the night sky. The speed was incredible. Michael was caught off guard as everything below blurred past him in an instant. Before he knew it, he and his undead had already soared above the clouds. Stop here, Michael commanded, and the griffin obeyed immediately. Michael wasn't a genius in science, but he still knew a few things. The higher the altitude, the thinner the oxygen. And right now, above the clouds, should be nearly non-existent. At first, Michael thought he would be affected. He was about to order his undead to descend immediately. Then he paused. He took a breath. He felt nothing. Not in the sense that he was suffocating, but rather, he didn't feel the need to breathe at all. A realization dawned on him. I guess it's to be expected. I'm not exactly an ordinary human anymore. If someone with more than 30 times the constitution of a normal human still had the same limitations, then the supernatural world would be nothing but a scam. Since he could breathe just fine, or rather didn't need to breathe at all, Michael was in no hurry to descend. As for his undead, it was a dead being. Oxygen was irrelevant. And even if it had been alive at this level, it likely wouldn't have been affected either. Now that he was high above the ground, Michael could see much farther than he ever could from the surface. This world is huge. Honestly, he would have thought the same even if he were still on Earth. At a certain point, everything just looked endlessly vast. But what truly caught his attention were the traces of civilization in the distance. Beyond the wall gathering near where he had left his undead, he could now see even more settlements. Clearly, he was no longer outside of civilization. He was heading deeper into it. Michael recalled something and turned to look behind him. In the direction he was looking, far in the distance, lay the ruins that had served as his initial arrival point in the land of origin. Due to the vast distance, he couldn't see anything, but he knew the direction was right. A thought came to Michael. For a moment, he considered flying there. But just as quickly as the thought appeared, it vanished. It seems I might have gotten myself a heart demon. Michael called it that because it felt like the perfect term for his situation, rather than PTSD. There were 2 times Michael had felt the presence of death since he became an awakener. And surprisingly, both had been in the land of origin. The first was his very first battle. The second was his encounter with the corrupted being in the Black Tower. The latter had left a much deeper impact. Because unlike the first, even his system had warned him that he would truly die. Several system panels, which were usually calm blue, had turned blood red, signaling imminent death. That incident had left a mark on Michael. And it wasn't until now that he realized what he thought he had moved past was merely forgotten. Perhaps this was his way of coping. Then again, it had only been a day since the incident. If he had truly been unaffected, that would have been remarkable. But the fact that he wasn't, it simply meant he wasn't that mentally strong. Still, it doesn't matter if I have to do it scared, I will do it. For personal reasons, Michael knew he would have to face that monster one day. Unfortunately, he was too weak right now. But not for long. At first, he hadn't been sure if that corrupted monster was truly a rank 2 creature. But after witnessing the strength of a king-rank cultivator in the real world, who was said to be comparable to a rank 3 awakener, Michael was now certain. That monster was rank 2. What he didn't know was how strong it was within that rank. But in the end, that didn't matter. Because Michael had never stopped growing stronger. And he had no intention of slowing down now. Michael thought for a while, and didn't immediately command his undead to descend from the sky. Up here, there were a few things he could and wanted to do. For one, he hadn't had his fill of flying yet. Though Michael found himself trembling slightly whenever he saw the distance between him and the ground, he still enjoyed the feeling of cutting through the wind. Fly a little lower, Michael commanded his undead, while also guiding it toward the sky above the settlement he had planned to enter the previous day. Though he couldn't see everything clearly from this height, Michael could still make out a few details. It's quite huge. That was his first impression. The entire settlement was walled off in an almost, but not quite, perfect circle. Several stone buildings stood alongside residential structures. Based on the territorial size, Michael estimated this place was probably a town. As for the number of people living inside, that was something he didn't bother guessing. Even though it was late at night, several buildings still had light coming from their windows. Some streets were also lit up. As he observed the town below, he made sure to keep his distance and not go any lower. Only the heavens knew if they had weapons capable of shooting him down. This was his first interaction with civilization in the land of origin, so he remained cautious. Fortunately, the griffin he rode on just happened to have a dark appearance. Even if some people noticed him, the distance between them ensured that he and his undead would likely appear no larger than a bird. Not to mention, the dark night sky helped conceal them even further. After flying several laps around the town, Michael finally ordered his undead to return to the surface. Landing near where his other undead were, Michael reluctantly got off the griffin. He gazed at it, a small smile forming at the edge of his lips. "I won't even bother using undead summoning on you right now and ruin my mood." Michael had never been a fan of his luck. And given that his mana was limited, unless he miraculously succeeded on his first attempt, he doubted he could manage more than 2 tries at best. Rather than risk failure, it was better to find another corpse to revive and fill all his contract slots for more evolution points. As for evolving the undead griffin, it wasn't that Michael was tempted to do it. At level 27, the griffin was just 1 level away from reaching the maximum level its potential allowed. Thanks to his experiment with Prince, Michael knew that if he evolved the griffin now, the increase in strength would be massive. But that was one of the reasons why he held back. Aside from the fact that he was saving evolution points for tomorrow, when he would receive more and attempt to evolve one of his human undead, there were other reasons as well. For one, a stronger undead would only mean an even lower success rate when trying to use undead summoning on it. And more importantly, Michael worried that evolving the griffin would drastically increase its size, which would make things highly inconvenient. One particular concern stood out. While the black griffin was already huge, it could still barely squeeze into his storage space. That meant he could bring it into the real world if needed. But if it grew any larger, that option would be completely cut off. Sure, he would gain more strength as a necromancer if his undead got stronger. But right now, Michael was in no dire need of power. If he was, none of these reasons would have stopped him. For now, aside from wanting to fill his last 2 contract slots, Michael was also considering what to do with the rest of the corpses around him. The situation in the real world didn't seem like the best time to be buying and selling corpses like it was a normal day. And Michael wasn't interested in doing that anyway. Unfortunately, he still hadn't thought of a better way to store and preserve them. If only the space in my mark of origin was bigger. If that were the case, it would be the best solution. The time freeze effect inside the mark storage only made it even more ideal. Unfortunately, Michael also didn't have an undead with powers that could preserve corpses. Even if he did, would he just leave them out in the open? Never thought I would think so much about corpse-related matters, aside from how they're buried. Michael muttered absent-mindedly, lost in thought before coming to a halt. He turned his gaze downward, staring at the cold soil beneath his feet, then bent down to scoop up a handful. Cold. That was expected. Monster corpses, though, start to rot after a while. But if I bury them deep enough, not only will they be hidden, they'll also be preserved for a bit, right? The thought wouldn't leave his mind. It just made sense. Corpses were meant to be buried, and when needed, unearthed. A wry smile tugged at Michael's lips as he spoke softly. My old image of necromancers had them digging up coffins. To think I'd be the one creating them. Once again, Michael felt like a fake necromancer. Though he wasn't certain if this method would actually work, he still wanted to try it. At worst, The bodies would rot slightly and start to smell. But once they were turned into undead, the process of decay would halt due to the necromantic energy sustaining them, keeping them in a functioning state. I should have thought of this sooner. Michael sighed in mild frustration. That said, even if he wanted to test this method, there was something he needed to do first. Fill up all his contract slots. With 2 contract slots left to fill, Michael didn't really have a lot of freedom to choose randomly. Currently, he had 4 corpses to choose from. The hobgoblins he had taken from the real world, the long-armed monkeys and sand scorpions he had also collected from the same place, and the black griffin. Among the 4 types, Michael still had at least 3 for each corpse, but only 2 for the black griffin. It was also this particular group that Michael wasn't exactly excited to try. Just because he succeeded with the first corpse didn't blind Michael. Putting luck aside, experience told him he might very well just waste his time using undead revival and resting to recover mana, and still fail at reviving even 1 out of the 2 undead. Putting this aside as well, though the successful revival of a black griffin would very well give him more undead with rank 2 prowess, that was just it. At rank 1, he didn't think he'd be able to have a successful attempt at undead summoning on them, which also meant he would have to keep off evolving them, as that would only make things harder. And though rank 2 prowess was powerful, it wasn't like Michael didn't already have this. Lucky and Prince, any of the 2, could compete against early-stage rank 2 creatures and still win. Also, with his other high-leveled undead, thanks to the chaos that happened in the real world, with a little bit of evolution points to spend, he'd have several 3-star rare rank undead with rank 2 prowess. To be honest, for Michael, the greatest attraction the black griffins had for him was their ability to fly, and he wasn't sure how long such attraction would last. This was because of the words he had heard from Brian before they separated and the sight of the man flying itself. Unfortunately, the forum didn't provide much detail about the power increase or uniqueness of rank 2 awakeners compared to rank 1 and unranked awakeners, aside from the greater increase in stats and more skills gained. As for flying, Michael wasn't sure, but he hoped that would be the case. With his mind not really at the idea of attempting to revive the 2 black griffins, Michael turned to the other 3 corpses types he had. Anyway, he could always attempt the 2 later when he got more stronger and when he was at a higher level. After thinking about it for a while, Michael later chose the last 2 monsters he wanted to use and fill up his contract slots, the long-armed monkey and the sand scorpion. Though they both only had 1 skill, which were each interesting. Together with this, the main reason Michael chose them was because he had enough orcs in his army for now. Michael wasn't a specialist necromancer. Though he'd love to have more than one of the same undead in his army, it wasn't to the point he was obsessed with it. If he saw 5 birds and 5 lizards and he particularly loved birds, he'd choose 3 birds and 2 lizards. The only time he'd choose only one was if he was way too broke. At that point, the cheaper option just looked way more attractive. After making his decision, Michael didn't waste any more time and immediately started using undead revival on the corpses of the long-armed monkey and the sand scorpion. It wasn't until more than half an hour later that Michael was done. For the long-armed monkeys, he succeeded at his 3rd corpse and the 2nd attempt out of the 3 chances he had with the 1, and for the sand scorpions, he succeeded in the 3rd attempt with the 1st corpse. Though he later ended up filling his contract slots, Michael wasn't satisfied with the success rate. Have I killed too much? I've accumulated some bad energy. Remembering the ghost he brought peace to, Michael didn't feel his thoughts were impossible. Remembering the ghost he had apparently brought peace to without seeing them also made Michael develop some thoughts. For one, but seemed a class and a panel with the ability to level up wasn't all there was to an awakener. Though the world resembled a game to them, It obviously worked outside of a game. The limitations that games had didn't exist in this supernatural universe. Ghosts, huh? I wonder if it's possible to contract one in the future. Michael felt his thoughts were a bit ambitious, but perhaps it shouldn't be impossible. With a class that dealt with death, if he couldn't do it at rank 1, didn't mean it was impossible at higher stages. With the matter of his contract slots being filled finally done, Michael then went to the next matter at hand. Preserving his corpse collection. Well, rather than calling it preserving in its bare form, he just wanted to bury them. Fortunately, he had the perfect undead for the job, a female orc shaman with earth manipulation skills. With her abilities, Michael saw the possibility of this task being a lot easier. Since the earth shaman wasn't one, he was able to summon at any time from the netherworld. Michael tugged on his connection with her and commanded her to come to his location. When she did, they immediately got to work. The ground vibrated and a hole slowly appeared. Just as Michael had thought with his earth shaman, burying the corpses became a lot easier. With the undead orc by his side, Michael started to bury his corpse collection one by one. With the vitality of a monster, monsters didn't rot that fast, but it was only in relation to higher-level monsters. For lower-level ones, it was only slow at most. At least Michael could already start to smell some odd scent from some of the corpses when he moved them into the earth holes his earth shaman made. Hopefully, their bodies are able to stay relatively complete, Michael muttered as he stared at his surroundings. With a little attempt at clearing traces of his earth shaman's undead use of magic, one wouldn't even know there were monster corpses buried underneath. At least in the operation of storing the corpses, burying them was a successful method. As for worrying about the completeness of the corpses when he needed them, Michael wasn't really concerned. For one, the transformation into an undead, especially to a flesh undead, healed the body a little, which was why the stitched monster corpses he brought from the association had no issues. And if his suspicion about his talent healing his undead through evolution was true, he only needed materials for creating undead and not how complete they were, as long as it worked. Phew, I guess it's finally that time. With anything related to unused corpses out of the way, there was only one thing left now. Entering civilization for the first time in the land of origin. Michael stared at his outfit. Aside from looking a little dirty, he still looked presentable. At least to him, he did. The black leather coat he wore also made him look quite not out of place if the fashion style, if the par of the land of origin he was in, was the medieval era. So all in all, Michael didn't have any issues with himself. However, when it came to his undead, things became a little tricky. I could have the human mage follow me as he looks more human than any of my undead, but unfortunately, he himself is not presentable. Unfortunately, Michael hadn't brought a lot of disguise cloth. The human mage, not only was it dirty looking, but its leather armor and robe were also in tatters, thanks to Prince's handling. Just because he couldn't bring the undead in public with him didn't mean he couldn't do it secretly. However, it was only the human mage and the undead griffin Michael planned to bring along on his trip to the settlement not so far from him with his storage space. He planned to let his other undead hide here for the meantime. As for his protection, he felt he was strong enough for that. However, Michael was not cocky, but even if he needed protection beyond what he could give himself, the undead that had fought with him in the real world, the human mage undead and the undead griffin, alongside Lucky and Prince, whom he could summon from the netherworld, the undead he left in this world were lacking. Since he knew what he was going to do, Michael did just that. Gathering all his undead in one spot, the cave he had used for his temporary residence, and leaving a few instructions, Michael dashed out of the forest alone. After a while of running at a leisurely pace, Michael finally came out of the forest and was eye to eye with the walls of a not-so-distant settlement. Taking a deep breath, Michael started making his way to the settlement, but not on the main road. From his location, he could tell the gates were closed. Michael planned to sneak in the Lionheart Kingdom, one of the three most powerful kingdoms in the Dragon Empire. Rumors had been circulating that the old king was preparing to step down from the throne, causing a ripple of uncertainty and speculation throughout the kingdom and even the empire as a whole. Why was the king retiring? It was the question on everyone's mind, nobles and commoners alike. Yet no clear answer could be found. One thing was certain. A period of unrest had begun to take hold of the kingdom. Amidst this uncertainty, another major announcement shook the realm. The king's brother, the Duke of Evermoon, had declared an upcoming competition, open to the men of the kingdom and beyond. However, the entry requirements were said to be extremely strict, making it clear that only the most exceptional individuals could participate. But when one considered the grand prize, it became clear why the competition demanded only the best. Treasures so valuable they could leave even the empire's most powerful figures in awe were rumored to be among the rewards. Yet the true prize lay elsewhere. The winner would not only gain riches, but also marry the Duke's precious daughter, securing a noble title of at least Viscount within the Lionheart Kingdom. For a time, all eyes turned toward Lionheart, as the kingdom became the center of attention across the empire. Blackstone Town. Though night had fallen in some places, the day had only just begun. Inside a bustling bar inn in Blackstone Town, a female server flashed a playful smile at the young man before her. "Handsome, care for a drink?" "I'm broke, I don't have any money." "Then why are you here?" "For the atmosphere." A brief conversation was exchanged between the two. The youth was none other than Michael. After leaping over the rooftops and avoiding the guards stationed along the town walls, he had been anxious at first. But two things quickly reassured him. First, his attire didn't seem out of place. Second, there was no language barrier, not because the locals spoke English, but thanks to another perk of being an awakener: the ability to understand and speak all languages. Much like the sensation of using a skill, the knowledge of the local tongue came instinctively when conversing with natives. However, there were limitations. One still had to practice the accent and learn the language properly to read and write it. Awakener perks didn't cover literacy. So, in a way, most awakeners were illiterate at first. It wasn't all sunshine in the land of origin. After wandering through the streets and exchanging a few words with a few locals to confirm that he could, in fact, communicate here, Michael took a deep breath and stepped into a nearby establishment. A bar inn. His goal: to gather information. To be honest, Michael's decision was influenced by the entertainment he had consumed on Earth. Whenever a character arrived at a new location in a medieval-themed world, they would often head straight to a bar or inn to gather information. The female server's expression twitched. It wasn't that she was shocked by Michael's words, just a little taken aback by his blunt honesty. Plenty of people in the bar weren't actually there to buy drinks. Some came just to chat, gossip, or freeload from others. In a way, they weren't too different from Michael. The difference: most wouldn't outright admit they were broke. Instead, they would say they simply weren't in the mood for a drink yet. Even Michael was surprised by his own words. Though he appeared calm on the surface, deep down he was anxious. The quick-paced conversation with the server had been a result of him simply blurting out whatever was on his mind. But since he had already spoken, he could only pretend everything was normal. Fortunately, the server didn't make things more awkward. After giving him an odd look, she moved on to another table. Michael sighed in relief and shifted his focus back to observing his surroundings. Near the counter, a man was performing, a singer or maybe a bard. Michael wasn't sure what to call him. The man strummed a guitar-like instrument, his voice carrying over the lively chatter of the bar. Michael had to admit the song, though a little strange, sounded surprisingly good. But this wasn't what Michael had come for. His goal was information. A bar was the perfect place for people to let loose and spill all sorts of things. If he was lucky, he'd be able to figure out exactly where in the land of origin he had arrived, or what was at least going on in his current location. Every new awakener had to go through this challenge. Michael had read about it on the forums. Even those who appeared near civilized areas struggled during their first entry into this world. And sometimes things could be even worse. Rarely, but not impossibly, an awakener's first arrival could end in death, all because they had landed in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of this meant one thing. Integrating into the land of origin depended almost entirely on an awakener's abilities. And right now, Michael was undergoing his own trial. In a way, this feels like real transmigration, appearing in an unknown location. Trying to figure out what's going on, what to do next, and how not to expose yourself. Michael couldn't help but think that his situation mirrored some of the entertainment he consumed back on Earth. As several thoughts flashed through his mind, he pieced together what he could from the people around him. My wife cheated on me today, brothers. What did you do? I told her I wanted in too. I now understand the type of man you are. No, you all don't understand. She cheated on me with another woman. Apparently, I haven't been giving her attention because of you brothers, so she cheated. But now I want to give her all my love so we can both cheat together with the same woman. She's hot. Yay. Yes. Most of the conversations around him were like this. The atmosphere was unfamiliar and a bit uncomfortable for Michael. Not only was this awkward for Michael from Aurora, but also for the Michael from Earth. They weren't extroverts who went out all the time, especially to places with this kind of vibe. This was his first time. But after going through a lot these past few days, way more than this, Michael found that a little discomfort wasn't so bad. He quickly adapted. Fortunately, not all the conversations around him were useless. Some were quite interesting and informative. Do you guys know the latest news? Michael's senses sharpened as he caught on to a conversation at a nearby table. Tell us, what is it? They say a group of knights from the kingdom arrived yesterday and entered the Everlong Forest. Why? I'm not sure, but I heard a terrible monster has appeared in the forest. Wait, doesn't that mean we're not safe? The Everlong Forest is practically just outside the town walls. No need to panic. Don't you trust the kingdom's knights? They're incredibly powerful. You're right. I just can't help but worry a little. Hopefully, the goddess continues to bless us. Michael took mental notes while his ears caught another conversation. They say the application for the Duke's competition is closing soon. How I wish I could have joined. You pervert. I'm pretty sure you're old enough to be the princess father. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Whatever. Even if you weren't too old, what would you even do in the competition? If someone throws a fireball at you, are you going to lick it? Laughter followed that statement. Then another voice spoke. I've decided to travel to the big city, brother. Why? I don't want to die a farmer. I want to be an adventurer. I want to join the Adventurers Guild, hunt monsters, and create a story that bards will sing for centuries. The last speaker sounded young, drunk, and full of dreams. Kingdom Knights, the Duke's competition, the Adventurers Guild. Michael absorbed every piece of information. However, out of everything he had heard, What concerned him the most was the first conversation. "They're not talking about that monster from the ruins, right?" He wasn't sure, but something told him it was probably the case. There were many possibilities. For one, the monster could have left its original location. Another possibility was that the battle in the ruins, his fight alongside Lucky, combined with the prince's desperate last struggle, might have drawn attention. The mana usage had been immense, after all. But as much as the thought worried Michael, there was nothing he could do about it. Against that monster, he was still too weak. Even if he had a strong undead by his side, Michael knew that he needed to grow stronger personally too. After all, he had nearly died to a monster that had barely been conscious. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.